Hello fellow egoists! In today's video we'll be analyzing chapter 255 of Blue Lock, doing a field analysis first and then going into the story part. So, as the match starts, or rather the chapter starts, we have Ness getting the stray ball from Kunigami stopping Shido's attack. So just a quick thing about the placement of Ness, Kaiser and Grim for their quote-unquote strategy, is that basically Ness will be the closest to the ball. Because Ness is the closest to the ball, while having the best ball keeping and passing ability, he will be able to pass it to Kaiser or Grim the easiest compared to if they were closer to it. So as we see, if Ness passes to Grim, Grim will then be on a highway to the goal. Meanwhile, Kaiser will not be on a highway to the goal since he has Karasu man-marking him. But as we saw before, Kaiser is actually able to handle Karasu when even in a 2v1 situation. So he should be normally able to deal with Karasu in a 1v1 situation too. So after this we have Ness passing the ball to Grim, with Grim then passing to Kaiser. So if we look at the animation, we have Ness passing to Grim, and as we said, Grim is on the highway to the goal with no one stopping him. So he can literally just run over here and then cross it to Kaiser. But as we see on the animation, we actually have Shido and Kunigami who made a run from one of the goal boxes to the other, so they literally just ran like maniacs without stopping at any moment. With then Kunigami being able to deflect the ball, which then goes further, deeper into the field, in the midfield, with Raichi being able to take it. But as we see with my animation, we actually have a pretty interesting thing happening, which is that Charles put himself the deepest into the field and came from Raichi's blind spot to be able to take the stray ball. So this is exactly what Hiyori is talking about. Just now, if I backed up Raichi-kun, then he could have kept the ball. So where was Hiyori and why didn't he back up Raichi? And you see it on the animation, but what Hiyori did, if we slow it, is that look, Hiyori went into the blind spot of Kaiser and Karasu to try and get the ball from the cross, the same way that Isagi was actually on Rin in a opposite direction. So the Isagi and Hiyori put themselves on the two flanks to be able to get whatever stray ball from the Kaiser and Karasu fight-off would be there. But because of this, they left the deeper part of the field totally free, which is exactly where Charles put himself, which is totally normal because most of the defense was already on Kaiser, Karasu, and on Kaiser, Kunigami, etc. So all Charles could do was put himself in the best position to get a stray ball, which was right deeper into the field, by going into Raichi's blind spot. So here we see that it's not like if Hiyori was in the same situation, he could have put himself in this situation. It's just that Charles was much smarter about it and trusted his defense to do the job, right? While Hiyori was trying to get the ball from Karasu, from Kaiser rather. So this is exactly what that type of over small things like this Hiyori is talking about. Then we have the talk with his aura, not much to say, and then when Charles gets the ball, so right after this, let me speed up a bit, he then goes on a counter attack with, okay, it's a bit too fast, but you get the point. We have, so if we pause here, what Rin was proposing is that he goes on a simple 1-2 with Charles. So Charles, if we draw it, okay, this will be a bit hard, but basically what Charles wanted to do, or rather Rin wanted to do, is that basically they would do something where Charles passes it to Rin, Rin passes it back to Charles, and then they go into the box. The problem is that this was such a simple play that it couldn't fulfill the ego of Charles, which is about being a contrarian. So instead of doing this and going more into the inside, what Charles does is that he does a crossover with the ball and then goes on the outside, so more like this as I drew, because this is something that Isagi couldn't necessarily expect, since this is such a, how could I say, such a move that you wouldn't normally do in a 2v1 situation. You wouldn't use the other ones, you lose time this way. Normally you would just do a 1-2. So because of this, Isagi wasn't expecting it, and we see again how Charles' ego and general gameplay is about doing the unexpected, which we then see again as Hiyori comes to press Charles because he saw the play happening from behind, but Charles immediately goes on the offense again, by then doing an outside of the foot directly crossing for Shido into the box, which then gets stopped by Kunigami. Right there. So, if we go a bit over the action, we see that Charles uses a lot of blind spots, likes to always go for unexpected moves, whatever the situation is, and that Hiyori's problem, why he wasn't able to beat Charles per se, isn't necessarily because of his football IQ, because the plays that Hiyori is trying to do are correct, quote unquote. It's simply that he isn't taking the whole field into play and the finest detail, as he says, right? And generally what I think Hiyori should do to beat Charles is actually pay closer attention to Charles. If you don't, how can I say, doing the same thing that, for example, Isagi did with Rin, if you can't comprehend the movements of someone, then follow them on their tail, or the same way that he did with Snuffy actually, and try to work with this. So this would be the way of doing it, right? And with this, we're pretty much done with the field analysis. There's not much more to say. We could talk about finer details, but this is fine. I mean, this should normally work. So now let's go into full screen and talk directly about the chapter itself in terms of narrative value. So one thing about this panel that I quite enjoyed is that we're seeing actually the main protagonists for the goals in this match. Because as I said in my video about Isagi getting potentially a hat-trick, is that I don't see Kaiser getting a goal. And instead, at least for now, my biggest theory is that Isagi gets a hat-trick. And so with this, we might be seeing on this page the people who will be assisting Isagi. So I'll make a video about why Ness will actually be betraying Kaiser to make the last assist for Isagi. This will be its own specific video. And for Kunigami and Hiyori, it's actually talked about in this chapter specifically, which we'll get into, especially for Kunigami, because it's actually a really interesting thing that the manga is going for. Not much to say, after all, we talked already about all of this, about the field aspect. We do have Charles' aura, which is a sort of mix of the enemies from the new Zelda, with like the eye on the hand. It's just literally like a video game character, you could say. So this may not be Charles' aura per se, but more so the way Hiyori perceives Charles. We don't necessarily know yet, right? So that's just the way I would say it. So then after that, we now about Charles saying that Rin Itoshi is being boring. The big thing is that Charles likes to be a contrarian. He likes people who have a lot of heat into their gameplay and are going at full throttle, right? And so the thing is that right now Rin isn't following correctly his ego, or rather he's not using the deeper part of his ego, which is why he gets called boring not only by Charles but also by Hiyori at the beginning of the match, because Rin isn't following his urges enough, which we know are about destroying people at their best. So right now, what Rin would have done if he truly was following his original ego would have been that he would have went deeper into the field and tried to beat Isagi at an off-the-ball movement, since this is what Isagi is best at. So this is an example of why Rin isn't fully there yet, but he'll get there. There's no worries, because actually in the Menshine match, we saw from the way his aura looked, and especially from the fact that he was doing a 1v1 against Nagi at trapping, which is Nagi's best weapon, we know that Rin actually knows how to follow his ego. Maybe it's just a matter of him needing to be in the right mindset and being frustrated enough for him to actually get there. So then we also have Ness Charles's eye design, which is actually different from Metavision from the way it looks, because actually in the last chapter that we saw it made a click sound. Meanwhile, the Metavision and Predator eye designs have another sound effect used for them. So this truly seems like it's another type of vision, not related not specifically related to Metavision. And the way Charles is always using it is basically, once again, related to his ego of always going to the contrary to the expectations of the people on the field. So we don't know if this is specifically what the vision is all about, the vision ability, but we'll see. Then we have, of course, the Kunigami block, and the fact that Kunigami is currently in his peak, doing the peak performance that he can do, because of the fact that he's being fueled by his ego. That hasn't changed, which is about his own sense of justice. Rensuke Kunigami is an emotional creature. Now, about the self-style and world-style ego, I'll actually make a video about it. But the best way I can describe it currently is that if you have a certain goal, does that goal and the pleasure you derive from fulfilling that goal come from the validation of others, or does it come from your own sense of justice? And this is exactly why Kunigami is a self-type. Because he doesn't care about what the other people think. All he cares about is following his own sense of self, right? So this is why he's a self-type ego, even though his morals is about the others, etc., right? Then of course we have the talk. Okay, so this is, it may not sound like much, but this is one of my favorite parts of the chapter. It's when we have Shido popping a vein. Because the thing is that Shido is a character who has never been put into a harsh situation, quote unquote. His skill ceiling, his skill level, and his ego were always at a place where they were either high above the rest or not put in a challenge big enough that he needed to awaken per se. Because Sae in the U20 match was making tailor-made challenges for Shido, and Shido never had to, quote-unquote, how can I say, awaken because the challenge was too big, right? Except for, of course, his goal, his big drive. So, and this is something that I was theorizing but that didn't come true, is that we could see, after Rin's hat-trick, an evolution in our dear Shido's character, because he would be frustrated from not scoring. But then he scored twice in the Barsha match, so there was no use to give him some frustration, basically. And why I want Shido to be frustrated this match is because frustration is the #1 driving factor behind a character's performance and their evolution, right? If you aren't frustrated enough, you won't become the best. And this is something that was already talked about, actually, for both Rin and Shido back in the tryouts before the U20 match, where we had Rin saying that Shido can't ever become the best because he isn't frustrated enough when he sees people doing better than him, and he's just in awe, right? Which is a totally correct statement. Because she doesn't have that frustration, he can't get better at a faster speed, right? Even though his skill ceiling, his skill level was already that high to begin with. So then we get into the Isagi help me with my explosion talk. So there's a lot of things to talk about here. As I said before, with Kunigami's case, it's actually a really interesting case. So first off, we see that the moment Isagi sees that Kunigami's ego is still burning, he immediately has a plan. He also calls back to the fact that he assisted Kunigami, and most importantly tells to Kunigami that this time it's his turn to help Isagi, especially because Kunigami actually said it himself. I don't owe you a damn thing, so this, the thing that he owes to Isagi must now be repaid with helping with Isagi's explosion. And the thing is that, specifically with my explosion, it actually calls back to, again, the tryouts, where after Isagi used his senses, which I talked about in one of my past videos, which will probably appear on screen, we have Isagi using his senses, and then Shido coming up to Isagi and saying, "Oh, I'll surely enjoy your explosion." But the thing is that he says this, but don't forget that there's also that talk with Rin right after, where Rin says that if Shido is way too much into people, he won't be able to grow. So this calls back not only to the fact that we're currently on the way to get potentially Isagi awakening his senses and generally doing a huge explosion that Shido will be there to see, but also that Shido will be put in a crossroad where will he be gazing at Isagi's explosion and just enjoying it, or will frustration set in from Kunigami's man marking, which will help Shido to grow. So this is a sort of crossroad, it's a sort of potential man for the meme. I'll just put it on screen. It's a potential man type situation where Shido is on a path to potentially grow. So then we have Isagi, and this is the most important panel for me for this chapter specifically. Isagi with the spiral eyes, having a pose really similar to the first time he entered Blue Lock in chapter 1 of, well, Blue Lock. And so the big thing is that we see Isagi with the spiral eyes. Those who have watched my videos for a pretty decent moment by now should know that the spiral eyes are a representation of a person, a striker specifically, following their original ego. And as I talked about in my past video about Isagi's ego is about devouring others. It's about using them for his own personal gain and making himself shine brighter thanks to this. So when Isagi is saying this, he is not being kind to Kunigami for the sake of it. He is not just helping Kunigami because he wants to help Kunigami. He's basically manipulating Kunigami into his own best performance to then devour him and being able to score. So this is exactly what he says. If our opponents are using an ultimate ultimate chemical reaction, then we'll produce a triple cross flow chemical reaction. So this is Isagi showing his true colors to a certain extent. He doesn't, of course, he cares to a certain extent about Kunigami, but we know the difference between on-field and off-field Isagi. So this is really just Isagi on his way to devour Kunigami, even if Kunigami isn't aware of it. And this could put Kunigami in a really great situation on a narrative level, where he might be helping Isagi, as we see with his eyes shining brightly because of his sense of justice, and so regaining hope in humanity, quote-unquote, as a way of saying it, only to then be betrayed as he gets devoured by Isagi, and so being put himself the same way that Shido is at a crossroad, being put himself in the crossroad. Do I still follow my sense of justice while being betrayed, or do I go apeshit? So this is a great setup that Isagi is creating. Will Kunigami get devoured? He surely will, right? He surely will get devoured at least once, which may be coming from, like for example, he assists Isagi, and then he realizes, oh wow, I just got devoured or whatever, but we'll see anyway. And then it could lead to growth. So yeah, this is it with the chapter. I think I've talked about pretty much everything. Yeah, the parallel. Yeah, with this we're pretty much done, honestly. There's not much more to say. There are, of course, finer details which I can talk about, but at this point, I'll just tell you guys, go to my Discord server to ask me the questions if you have anything. Since I'm always active there, so I can respond to whatever you have to ask. I'll also be putting actually the field animation on the Discord server if you want to download it and use it for your own content as long as you credit me. And yeah, with this we're pretty much done. I hope you enjoyed the video, and don't forget to join, of course, the Discord server, or go follow my Twitter, but I shit post a lot on it. Don't expect me to post analysis every day. I post analysis every there and then, but not that regularly. So yeah, go follow at your own discretion, and have a great one, fellow egoists.